I'm Jonathan Larsen with TYT Investigates, and I am late today, so I apologize, but I was on a phone call with Jen Huger, my boss, so sorry, not sorry, I guess. Okay, so I'm in South Bend, which is why you get my glorious hotel room here as my backdrop, and I'm doing some video interviews with people. We'll get up one of those soon, and a couple others that are part of some additional reporting that I'm doing that hopefully within the next couple weeks I'll be able to share. In the meantime, I was kind of blindsided. I didn't know this was happening, but last night presidential candidates participated in Vice's Black and Brown Forum, and Pete Buttigieg was there, and Antonia, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, one of those ways, was not only did I appreciate that she asked about our reporting, but she was kind enough and gracious enough to mention the fact that it was a collaboration between the Root and the Young Turks, and mentioned us by name, which is, I think, a really responsible and upstanding thing to do. But unfortunately, it's kind of rare in journalism, and I'm sure I fall short on it as well. But specifically, Hylton was asking about the report that I did with Mike Harriet a couple weeks ago about Black police officers in South Bend who reached out to Buttigieg for help. That included 10 Black officers, many of them high-ranking veteran officers who signed on to letters to Buttigieg and other city agencies where they essentially identified issues of racism and asked for his help. And they got no response. And a big chunk of our story was about what happened to those officers and 3 officers who filed EEOC complaints and a couple other officers who filed lawsuits. And I wanted to offer some context to how Buttigieg responded. One of the things, and I'm quoting from the Vice write-up here, is he said, sometimes when an individual officer, often as a consequence of being disciplined, was appealing to the mayor's office to try and go around the process, we asked them to respect the process. So I want to unpack that first. He says, often as a consequence of being disciplined. Most of those officers were not being disciplined. And so to sort of dismiss the class of officers, as I mentioned, many of them were high-ranking. Not only were they not being disciplined, they had been promoted in the past and now held positions of leadership within the department. The younger officers were not approached with as much frequency to sign on, specifically because they didn't occupy those positions. They didn't know the history of the department as well, and they were perhaps more vulnerable to retribution. So to dismiss them in toto, because one of them, the lead officer, was in the middle of a disciplinary process, which, by the way, well, that's not a cool thing to do, to sort of say guilt by association. He responded as if respecting personnel concerns and not interfering with a disciplinary process was a responsible thing to do. But most of the officers had no such legal issues or disciplinary issues. And the other point I want to make is the letters were complaining about the process. So to say we asked them to respect the process, the entire point of the letters was to say, Mr. Mayor, your process is flawed. And again, remember that some of these people complaining were complaining about inequities in promotion, right? Some of these EEOC things were about being passed over for promotion. They hadn't done anything wrong. They didn't go to the EEOC because they were accused of theft or stealing evidence or whatever it might be. And therefore, there's a legal process that you can't interfere with by speaking out as mayor. These were people, most of them, who had no, there was nothing besmirching their name or reputation. There was no legal process to interfere with. They were specifically saying, we're not being rewarded for our good work. And yet he's saying, I didn't respond to them because some of them were accused. And by the way, some of the people being accused of things, I've heard Black officers tell me those accusations were punishment for speaking out. Whether that's true or not, it's I'm not in a position to say. But if the concern is that your process is being used to punish people who complain about the process, respect the process is not the right answer. So that's, I think, a problem with what we heard last night. And again, much praise to Hylton for raising the issue and for pushing back on it. And the campaign, according to Vice, this has not come out in the forum, but Vice wrote up the exchange, and they also did some reporting on this themselves. Quote, his campaign noted the lead officer on that letter was at the time facing suspension for striking a handcuffed inmate. Again, the question was not necessarily did that person actually strike the handcuffed inmate, but was that disciplinary rigor applied to everyone equally? Because it will not take you long if you speak to Black South Bend cops to find examples of white officers accused of the same thing who faced a very different disciplinary process, if any. Quote, the campaign also noted there was an increase in overall officer complaints during this period because of an increase in officer discipline to try to rein in police misbehavior. The complaints, and Mike posted them, were not about those individual officers being disciplined. It wasn't help, we did bad things, please help us make an end run around the system. In the sort of worst case scenario, it was, okay, maybe I did a bad thing, but I'm being punished inequitably. But the vast majority wasn't, I'm even being accused of it. The vast majority was, I'm being demoted for speaking out. I'm not being promoted because of the color of my skin, or others are not. Here's another point he makes. Buttigieg says, I get a lot of questions about why I removed a black police chief. That's Darrell Boykins, the first black police chief in the city's history, and so far the only, appointed in 2007 by the previous mayor, removed by Pete Buttigieg in March of 2012 from his position as chief. I get a lot of questions about why I removed a black police chief. And by the way, the reason for that is because he hasn't answered them. I've been asking questions since April about why he removed him, and they won't speak to me. They won't let me speak to Buttigieg. They won't answer a number of specific questions I've had, not necessarily about why, but about his answers for why. He's given answers, but they're inconsistent, they're contradictory, and they're contradicted by other facts. He goes on to say, almost never do I get asked why I appointed a black police chief in the first place. Well, I've asked about the so-called appointment of Darrell Boykins, right? He comes in, Buttigieg comes in as mayor January 1st, 2012, and technically Boykins is appointed, right? That's how they refer to it. But that's a technical term which can have a number of different meanings. Does it mean, here is your certificate of appointment, you are now hereby and in perpetuity until further notice, the chief of police? Or does it mean no one said clean out your desk, so I stuck around, right? And it's not always clear how each mayoral transition works. So I've been asking questions for months. He says not often, almost never do I get asked why I appointed a black police chief in the first place. I would love to see the email he sent saying, I hereby appoint you police chief. I've been asking. So if he's complaining, if Buttigieg is complaining about not being asked about his appointment of Darrell Boykins, please send him my way, because I would love to have that conversation, and I've been asking to. He then says, when federal investigators came to South Bend and were investigating practices in the department, and I did not find out from him, that changed our relationship. We reported back in September that according to secret testimony given by his own chief of staff now, who was his, he's his campaign manager now, this is Mike Schmuel, who was Buttigieg's chief of staff in the beginning of 2012, Buttigieg actually knew about the investigation before Boykins did. So he says, I did not find out from Boykins. That's because Boykins didn't know about it. And so to me, the real question is, why didn't you tell Boykins? For 8 years, he's been saying Boykins didn't tell me. There's no evidence that Boykins knew before Buttigieg did. In fact, Buttigieg, according to Shmuel's own testimony, Buttigieg knew about it before the feds knew about it. Police officers, white police officers, went to Mike Shmuel and said, I don't know exactly what they said or how true it was, but roughly their account was, this guy Boykins is listening to our phone calls and we're going to go to the feds about it. And Mike Shmuel then told Buttigieg. Last night after the forum, I texted with some of the officers in question because he said, we asked them to respect the process. Now, you can't ask someone to respect a process without asking them, right? Which involves communication, which suggests that he responded. So I texted 2 of the officers who signed those letters. You can see them on my Twitter feed at JT Larsen. I posted screenshots. To one, I said, did he ask you to respect the process or did he not respond to you? And the officer texted back, no, never, it's a lie, lie. I texted another of the 10 cops. I sent the quote to him from Buttigieg, and then I wrote, so did he respond? The response from the black officer was, not to me. And then there was another officer who did sue, claiming discrimination in not being in the assignments he got or did not got, and asked, did he ask you to respect the process? And he responds, I sent him emails and he never responded. I've posted screenshots. That was actually, I got permission to use his name. That was David Hackett, who left the South Bend Police Force. He joined a neighboring police force and was promoted last summer. So I think Vice did a great job last night of really bringing these issues to the forefront and not taking the first answer as the answer. And it was clear that they weren't happy with the second answer either. So kudos to them, but their work and my work so far are not the entirety. This is not over, and that's why I'm in South Bend, and that's why you'll be hearing more from us. And with that, I'm going to see what you folks have to say in the comments, and I apologize in advance if the feed has been janky, but the hotel Wi-Fi is not the best. All right, let's see what you folks are saying. Tony Barnes says, if Pete is the nominee, I'll be surprised if many TYT subscribers vote for him based on all the clips they do going after Pete. TYT makes Pete out to be a villain more than Trump. So I think that's a fair complaint. I'm not saying I agree with all the specifics of it, but I get the sentiment behind it. And what I want to say about that is this time of the political process is the Democratic primary. And so the entire point of politics and journalism right now is to vet these people. And most of these people have already been vetted. Bernie Sanders was almost the Democratic nominee just 4 years ago. Elizabeth Warren has been a national figure 4 years. Joe Biden was vice president. He's run for president many times. So if it seems like there's a pileup on Pete Buttigieg, it's because he's the one who's never had a pileup before. That's why I started looking into him. And not only has he never faced presidential level scrutiny before, he's not even faced state level scrutiny before. And he's not even faced, according to people I've spoken with, he's not even faced South Bend scrutiny before. When I first came here in April, I heard a fair number of people dumping on the local media. And I will say that local media reports from years ago and recently as well have been really important and valuable to me in terms of learning things that were going on. But it's also been clear that there have been huge gaps in terms of where they looked at, where they looked, who they spoke to, what they were trying to find out. And so if if Buttigieg hasn't even gotten the scrutiny you would expect from the only daily newspaper and the few TV stations that cover a city of 100,000 people, then it shouldn't be too surprising that when national outlets start looking, they're going to find things to talk about and raise questions about. So I get why it looks like a pile-on, but in a democratic and small d democratic process, you are supposed to do the adversarial work of looking into the candidate's past, kicking the tires, questioning their judgment, and that doesn't make them a villain, right? We're all imperfect. At TYT Investigates, we run corrections. Why? Because we screw up. It happens, right? We don't want it to happen. We strive to do better, and we do have systems and people in place whose job is to catch our mistakes, and we're constantly doing that, but we don't assume that mistake equals villain, right? You've never seen me say Pete Buttigieg is a villain. You've never seen me say he's racist, because that's not what we do. Those aren't judgments that we make. We try to find out what happened. That's it. That's it. And the questions of what happened have been, to a large extent, answered, not entirely for the other candidates, but when I started looking into Buttigieg, virtually none of those questions had been asked. So if it looks like a pile-on, it's for structural reasons rather than personal reasons. And my guess is that if Pete Buttigieg were to win the nomination, I would guess that the host of the main show would endorse him and talk about how vastly superior he is to Donald Trump. So, you know, I get that it feels very, it feels like a rough period and it feels like it's personal, but that's how this system is supposed to work. You're supposed to conflict and challenge during the primary process to figure out who should be the nominee, right? That's the point of having the primary process. Let's see, Grammy Bernie Bro says, good people admit their mistakes. Villains cover them up. I'll say it, Pete is, okay. See, now you're calling him, now you're saying all these mean things that I just said I'm not going to say. So Grammy, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm not going to begrudge you that, but I think those are the kinds of judgments that we as humans don't get to know about the inner selves of other people. I've not heard in any of the reporting and all the people I've spoken to on and off the record, I've never heard any suggestion that Pete Buttigieg had like specific overt racism as a motive. If anything, it seems to me that there's a conflation of sort of baked in small town corruption, not necessarily in the evil villain sense, but just in terms of the fact that it's small means you end up getting all these relationships and conflicts of interest in terms of positions that people hold and the connections they have. And there's a lot of sort of structural systemic stuff that if it's not consciously pushed back on, will lead to racist outcomes, right? And I think that's part of the point of when he himself talks about systemic racism. Anyway, you guys are talking about Bernie. Caranola says, Buttigieg certainly hasn't faced Japan scrutiny. The major public TV news here just gave him 20 minutes of coverage without any mention of this super important investigation or about his lower poll numbers. Well, it's ironic, Karen, that you mentioned that from Japan, because I was actually called up by a reporter for a Japanese newspaper who interviewed me about my work on Buttigieg, and I actually had coffee with her a few days ago because she's in town as well and asked to meet up. So Japan may be hearing about this stuff at some point. Dale C305 says it's better to tell the hard truth about a politician than letting a single letter decide how you react to them. No Middle Ground says, is Pete a racist or is he just power hungry and cares nothing for others regardless of race? Well, I mean, I'm sorry, No Middle Ground. I know, you know, we're buddies, but I don't think that, I mean, those are both cartoon explanations, I think, for how humans work. I think, I think Buttigieg has flaws like we all do. And if you are not careful about how to mitigate those flaws, right? I've been in positions where I've specifically said to people who worked for me, I'm terrible at this, I'm terrible at this, please keep me honest, right? Check me, push back on me. And even with that, right, I still screw up. So I don't think it was because, am I evil or am I stupid? I'm human, right? So it's work to, especially when a lot of the systems that you're inheriting, especially if your experience isn't perfectly translatable to what you're trying to do. Sherry Addis says it's disgusting that no other reporters seem to be scrutinizing a presidential candidate. So this is a little bit self-aggrandizing, but some of them are. And I heard back in April, the day after I arrived here in April, a bunch of sources told me, oh, the New York Times is coming here, so-and-so, someone else is coming here. And I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll move on to something else because they're all going to beat me to it. But Michelle Smith from the Associated Press last week did a phenomenal job. And I just realized I'm supposed to meet someone 9 minutes ago. So I'm going to have to say goodbye. But Michelle Smith, the AP piece, was really good. So I hope people will check that out. And I'm sorry about killing the conversation. I'll try to keep the chat live if I can. But I am running late, so I apologize. And I don't know about tomorrow. We'll see. I will try. But in the meantime, thanks so much for supporting my work here, guys, in South Bend, as well as supporting TYT Investigates and the Young Turks generally. So thanks for taking care of us. Please take care of each other. Please take care of yourselves. And I'll see you soon. Bye.